양쪽을 똑같이 보도하는 게 이게 과연 균형 보도일까라고 고민하셨던 분들이 계실 것 같아요. 그거에 대한 답변도 주신 것 같고요. false equivalent라는 표현을 하셨습니다. 또 그 공인이 사적 자리에서 이야기를 할 때 그 정보 자체가 공적 정보로 되니까 조심해라. 그러니까 언론인의 공적 책임감을 말씀을 하셨습니다. 그 부분도 굉장히 유의해야 될 점이라고 저희가 생각을 하고요. 또 30second 룰도 굉장히 좋죠. 좋은 정보라고 생각합니다. 많은 그 의문에 답을 주셔서 대단히 감사합니다. 청중들이 물어본 몇 가지 질문이 있습니다. 특히 이제 인터넷 시대에 접들어서 뉴스라는 장르 자체가 막 이렇게 변하면서 엔터테인먼트와도 결합을 하고 쇼랑도 결합을 하고 그런 현상에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지요? 저널리즘에 어떤 영향을 줄지요?
That is a great question, and I think it's a big problem. It's a problem I'm sympathetic to. One reason that news organizations engage in a lot of entertainment is the financial reason. I talked before in my speech about the kinds of advertising and the kind of purchasing a newspaper or a magazine at the newsstand or subscribing to it that provided most of the revenue news organizations needed to operate up until the last 10 or 15 years. Now that revenue stream has been disrupted. It will never, I think, get back to what it was. And so news organizations look for different ways to bring in income to make up the loss. And I'm sympathetic because the money that needs to be replaced, that's the money that keeps you paying your investigative reporters. That's the money that keeps you paying your foreign correspondents. That's the money that allows you to have things like, an art critic or a theater critic that really give a news organization great range and great intellectual appeal. The danger, though, is that you start to blur the line between news and entertainment in a couple of ways. One is to use, I don't know if you know the term clickbait. It's an American slang term. It means putting up something on your website that's really pretty silly, but it'll get a lot of people to click on it. So, for instance, videos of cats are big clickbait for American news organizations. And so part of the question is, I don't know if many of you are familiar with BuzzFeed, which is really one of the very exciting startups of the digital era and does some incredible reporting. But BuzzFeed's model is a mixture of things like cat videos and really silly things and also very serious, investigative reporting. The question will be how to keep that in proper balance, because it's not unheard of at all for newspapers or magazines long before the internet era to have some sillier coverage and some serious coverage. Vanity Fair magazine, for instance, always had this balance between celebrity profiles, so the big article about Tom Cruise or Madonna or Beyonce that gets someone to buy the magazine, but then once you've bought it, there'll be a very serious story about, say, the Iraq War. So this isn't just true of the digital era, but I think it's become more pronounced. The other kind of problem with blurring the line is when news organizations begin to put on events to raise money. So a couple of good examples of this are not good, they're vivid and they're kind of disturbing. The New Yorker magazine is my favorite magazine in the world. I think it's extraordinary. But the New Yorker magazine, as part of building its brand and bringing in revenue, does an annual festival with live performances of music and theater and a lot of conversations with important public figures, and you pay tickets. You pay for your ticket to go to it. Advertisers buy advertisements. So it's a big source of cash for the New Yorker. This year, the New Yorker wanted to invite Steve Bannon to be interviewed on stage by the editor of the magazine, David Remnick. And there was a huge outcry against it by staff writers on the New Yorker as well as by the public. And I thought to myself, why was there such an outcry? And here's what I believe. It's one thing for the New Yorker magazine to say David Remnick or anyone else is going to write an article about Steve Bannon, who, as you know, is this very controversial, very polarizing figure who is part of the Trump campaign and is now sort of going around Europe trying to build up very nationalistic political parties. And he's an important part of the public life of the United States and much of the world now. You can't ignore him because you disagree with him. And I think that if the New Yorker had said, we're going to have in this issue David Remnick writing about Steve Bannon, no one really would object to it. But the idea that Steve Bannon was being used as a way to sell tickets and make money, and that in fact his very offensive ideas were being used as a form of clickbait, if you want to put it that way, showed some of the problems of a news organization trying to also operate as basically an events company. And I'm sure all of us as journalists followed the terrible news about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabian journalist who was also a columnist for the Washington Post. And part of what happened right after the murder was Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is widely believed to have been knowledgeable of the killing, if not having ordered it, held his big investment conference in Saudi Arabia. He calls it Davos in the desert. And a lot of people pulled out of it because they didn't want to be associated with his regime now. But I was shocked to see that some of the organizations that were sponsors of it, although they did pull out, were news organizations. The New York Times, I believe, I may be wrong, but I think Reuters, I think Bloomberg, and I thought, this is a problem. Why are news organizations, as part of building their brand and indirectly getting revenue, sponsoring basically an investment conference for a particular government? What kind of conflict of interest problem does that pose? Can you possibly report honestly and fairly about a country when you're part of trying to generate investment for that country? So these are, not new problems, but new versions of old problems.